My name is Elias Brauch. I'm one of the co-authors of the German National Report on Education. And in the next 20 minutes, I'll give you some insights from the German National Report on Education on the digital infrastructure and digital transformation of the German education system. So I'll do a quick overview of what the National Report on Education is. Thanks. And then we will have a look at Germany's education system that is in transition right now. We have a focus on findings on digitalization. I brought some selected findings. I can't show you all the findings. The reports have more than 400 pages, but we will do a run through different kinds of indicators of context of education, early childhood education, school education, adult education. And I will conclude with some further discussion questions that we deal with at my research institute. Let's do the quick overview of what the National Report on Education in Germany is. The idea of the report is to give a comprehensive review of the entire system in Germany and to take in a life course perspective on the entire education system. So we do look on different kinds of the education system, not just schools. So we have, as I was saying, context of education, but also early childhood education. In this presentation, we will look at legal regulations, some parts of school education and teachers. We will look at competencies and how they developed in the recent years or declined in the recent years. We will look at some indicators about online learning and adult online learning. There's an alternating focus chapter in the National Report on Education in Germany. The recent one and the recent report that was just published 2 weeks ago, the focus chapter dealt with educational inequalities based on social background. We did have a focus chapter in 2020 that was about digitalization, but today I brought recent findings. But I recommend to have a look into the report from 2020 as well, even though it's only in German. But we all do know that large-scale models are quite good in translating things today. The report itself is published every 2 years. So the next one will be in 2028. So the National Report on Education is indicator-based. That means that we combine official statistics and social science data. And the main goal of the report itself is to identify long-term trends in the education system and also structural tensions, especially between cross-sector challenges, like cross-sector challenges between different kinds of education sectors. So for example, the combining early childhood education and school education, what kind of cross-sector challenges happen between these two sectors. What is important to mention is that the report is restricted to only solid data availability. So we can't look at every single kind of thing in the education system, and we only look at things that have a solid data availability. The main goal is to address different kinds of target groups, mainly educational policy making, but also administration and practice. It's highly cited in science, it's used in training, and we try to foster the general public debate about education in Germany with empirical data. Our purpose is not to prescribe policy, but to provide the empirical basis. So we identify challenges, but we don't give any recommendations to the policy level. So we are not recommending any certain political action. This is the goal, the task that the political level has when we publish this report. The report is mainly managed by the DIPF, the Leibniz Institute for Education and Education Information, but quite a lot of the big educational institutes in Germany are also part of it and are responsible for certain kinds of chapters. It is kind of comparable to maybe you've heard of the report Education at a Glance by the OECD. It's the kind of same concept, just for the German concept. We do know that there are some reports in other countries, and I will present some findings for the countries represented over here today. even though I just realized that I kind of ignored Switzerland. I'm sorry about that, even though half of the presentations have been from Switzerland or have a connection to Switzerland, but I have some findings just prepared. Anyway, let's look into the current trends and challenges stated in the National Report on Education in Germany. So what we see is that there is quite a lot of digital transformation, and one of the current trends, of course, is artificial intelligence. And we see that there has been quite a lot of dynamism in this field, but also a lot of hesitant skill development, especially among staff and teachers. One of the main challenges that the recent report outstates is that the German education system must institutionalize digital transformation as a consistent, systematic task. Right now, we see it's not as systematic and also not as coherent as we would like it to be. Let's go into the selected findings. Beginning with context of education, we see in 2024 that 4% of the entire German workforce is employed in the sector of information and communication, which is highly connected to AI and also digitalization. We see that there is a lot of growth in this field. In 2014, it was 3%, even though it's a low number, it means quite a lot of people. And we also see quite a lot of demand in that field. Even though, as I was saying, there's a lot of dynamism, it can change quite quickly in this field. We see a lot of investments in Germany in the expansion of digital infrastructure. We used to have the Digital Pact 1.0, now the new one 2.0, but we also have special fundings. It is also in context of the AI Act of the European Union. So we do track and monitor that there is quite a lot of investments. What we do not know, or we just have a few findings, is on the actual impacts of these fundings. What we know about the Digital Pact 1.0 is that it had an impact on the infrastructure in schools. So more computers available, more tablets available. But all the other ones, there are just a few findings on it. What we all are aware of is that the COVID-19 pandemic ignited quite a growing momentum in the expansion of digital education. But what we could show in the report is that early childhood education in Germany has been much less affected by it than in comparison, for example, to the school sector. Going further, looking at online activities of the population, and in this case of age groups in the working population, what we see over here is that the percentage of the population that uses internet for learning has risen quite a lot in the recent years. But what we see is that it is highly unevenly distributed. So over here, grouped in the groups of advanced vocational degrees, intermediate vocational degrees, or low-level vocational degrees in the German population, what we see that especially people with advanced vocational degrees are using internet for learning in comparison to low-level vocational degrees holders. We also see an age difference. And another finding was that we could see that the enrollment in online courses kind of plateaued in the recent years, and that especially informal learning activities right now are still kind of pushing the rise in online learning activities. Going further on into early childhood education, as I was saying, just selected findings, but what is quite interesting that we've seen a sharp increase of use of apps in early childhood education in Germany. So they're mainly used for sharing information and communicating with parents, so less on, for example, tracking educational outcomes. But we see that there has been a sharp rise from 34% in 2022 to 51% in 2024. But what we also see and what has been discussed already is that we see quite a lot of security vulnerabilities when it comes to data protection in these digital devices that need to be addressed and are not that much aware in the public debate right now. What is also quite interesting, we look at the age group of 2 to 6 years old, is that the ownership of digital devices has risen quite a lot in Germany. Even though it's not half of all the kids owning a smartphone, but we see that every 10th kid, for example, owns a smartphone, even in this age group. Children's computers are on the rise and also tablets. I need to mention that some of the findings are from the report from 2024 because there hasn't been so many findings in the recent report on digitalization, just to highlight that. If we look at digital activities and families, what we see over here is different kinds of activities of mothers and fathers in early childhood. And what we see is that for the most part, digital activities complement the family learning environment without replacing analog activities. So what we don't see is a sharp decline in, for example, reading aloud. It's still one of the main things that parents do with their kids, but one of the main things in the age group of 2 to under 6 years old is watching TV, for example, or not that much of using internet or computer and gaming. What we see over there as well are disparities when it comes to social backgrounds. So less privileged families do use digital activities much more. In these cases, it's not as much complementing the learning environment, but also replacing analog activities. Going further on into the school education system in Germany, what needs to be highlighted, the German education system is mainly managed on the federal level. And what I wanted to highlight over here is that we see quite a lot of differences between even the federal states in Germany when it comes to the availability and the status of mandatory computer science classes. Over here, what we see, for example, that only 2 federal states in 2024 had in the lower secondary education at least 6 required hours of computer science and all different kinds of types of schools. In Germany, I've updated this map with like recent data that we have, and where we see there is some more implementation, for example, in Thuringia, keeping up, and also when we look at Baden-Württemberg in the lower on the left, they, for example, introduced for the upper secondary education higher level difficulty classes. But we see quite a lot of differences all over Germany, how like deeply implemented mandatory computer science classes are. Going further on into school education, we have quite a lot of lacks when it comes to data in this field. So on the system level, we don't have nationally and internationally comparable data sets. There is some developments happening, but we don't see them we don't have them available right now. We do have some surveys, and they show us that AI application usage among the age groups of 12 to 20, under 20 years old, has risen sharply, especially in the recent years. So between 2024 and 2025, now almost all the students do use AI, especially when it comes to homework and learning, but also for different kinds of purposes. And when we look at teachers, we also see quite a lot of usage, and well over half of all the teachers now use AI. But we do know that teachers articulate quite a lot of uncertainties how to use AI, how to use it in a professional way, and teachers asking for professional development, especially when it comes to the use of AI. Going deeper into teachers' education, what we see over here is a graph about training and further professional development of teachers. We don't have any information on AI. This is more on digital media use. One of the first things that needs to be mentioned is that from our perspective as a monitoring instrument, there is no systematic monitoring of training and further professional developments for teachers in Germany. But what we see over here is that the majority of all the teachers in Germany and also on the international average do articulate needs to have more digital media support or have professional development on that. So especially the first 2 graphs over here, we see that Germany is even significantly higher than the international average. That, for example, the use of digital media to support individualized learning for students is highly asked in Germany. But what we see in this graph as well is that on the international level, we do see it in other countries too, that there is quite a lot of need for professional development articulated by the teachers. What I want to keep in mind is especially individualized learning for students. We had that in the recent, in the former presentations. This is one of the things where we see most potential when it comes to learning and supporting learning for students, and quite a lot of teachers asking for support. Mirroring this with teachers' perspectives on digitalization related elements on teacher education, so what they have actually experienced in university, I brought to you some comparisons to the countries that are represented over here. And what we see that in the purple lines, the EU average is that not even half of all the teachers in the teacher body after they've completed their teacher education articulate that they have had any kind of using digital media, for example, in their education. What needs to be kept in mind is that, of course, older teachers, when they completed their teacher education, digital media hasn't been such a big thing in their education. But what I want to highlight over here is especially Germany, with such a high gap between the other countries and the EU average, where quite a lot of teachers, or just a few teachers, say that they had any lessons or instructions in how to use digital media to assess students' learning progress. So there's quite a lot of lack in the teacher education reported by the teachers, and also quite a lot of demand for further professionalization. Going further to the competencies and outcomes of school education, what we see over here, and sorry that I just ignored Switzerland on that, but what I can tell you is what we see over here is results from ISILS. It's one of the big large-scale assessments that tracked computer and information-related competencies on the international level. And what we see over here is that we see a sharp decline in the proficiency in this competency field. So what we see in 2023, for example, on the EU level, there has been a sharp rise in comparison to 2013. So what we see over here is 44% of all the students scoring in the group numbers 1 and 2, which we consider is low performing. There has been a rise even though the COVID pandemic hit between these years. We see that also in different kinds of countries. We see that on the achievement scores up there, these are the averages over the countries. And there we see a decline in almost all the countries. I can tell you about Switzerland, that Switzerland only participated in 2013, and they had almost the same numbers as Germany. We don't know how Switzerland developed because they haven't participated since then. But what we see over here is a sharp decline. But when we look at Italy, which is quite surprising, they've managed to increase. For example, on the achievement score, we are now on 491 still, or now kind of in the average, the EU average. And they managed to decrease the amount of kids in the lower performing groups. We don't know how Italy did that, but they've managed to have an increase in comparison to all the other EU countries. What's need to be highlighted as well is the Czech Republic, with very high numbers on the achievement scores, and also a rise in the amount of kids with low performing results, but still much better than all the other countries. Going further into adult education, we don't have that much information about adult education and competencies like we have on the school level, but what we do see is that there is a rise in digital skills on the low performing or the basic digital skills. So what we see in Germany, for example, between 2021 and 2025, there has been a rise in the basic digital skills. We also see that on the EU level, but again, we do see quite a lot of disparities when it comes to especially people with low levels of formal education, as well as a lot of workers engaged in manual labor. They rarely possess even basic digital skills. What time is it?
55.
Okay. Well, then let's just continue with the last graph about adult education. Here we can have a look at the results of the German digital offerings in the German education system. And what we see over here is that there has been quite a lot of expansion of digital offerings in the adult education. So by now the numbers are a little bit older, but by 2022, 35% of all the offerings in adult education took place exclusively online. There is a COVID pandemic effect on that as well. But what is important to look at is that the level of digitalization is quite different when it comes to different kinds of segments of continuing education. Oh, it kind of messed up a little bit, this graph. But anyway, what I want to highlight, for example, is that career-related continuing education has more digitalization included in the offerings than in comparison to, for example, non-occupational continuing education. And what we see as well is that digitalization has put quite a lot of competitive pressure on the market, because adult education is mainly a market-oriented field and not so much institutionalized and formalized. The state-funded adult education in Germany is mainly done through the German Volkshochschulen, the adult education centers. And over there, we see that there is less digitalization in the courses that they provide. But what needs to be kept in mind that we can't digitize all courses in education, especially in this selected type of provider, the adult education centers. They provide quite a lot of health education courses, like sport courses, and also culture education that can't be easily digitized. So what we see overall is quite a lot of differences in the speed of the implementation of digitalization in the German education system. And what I want to conclude with are the main questions that we ask ourselves in the National Monitoring on Education, or the National Report on Education, when it comes to digitalization, that we can't answer all the time. I want to give with to you is what kind of different kinds of requirements do we need in education for digitalization and also AI implementation? What kind of requirements need to be done in schools? What kind of infrastructure needs to be done, but also what kind of educational courses are need to be developed to implement digitalization in AI and learning? What we also see, and I think I've shown in the last graph especially, is that we see different rates of implementation of digitalization in the education system. And one of the big questions is, how do we manage this and how to govern digitalization? And one of the main questions that we ask ourselves right now is, what would a system coherent governance would look like in Germany, but also on the EU level? Because what we are quite aware of and what we want to point out is that the implementation of digitalization needs to be on a thoughtful reflection, and every student and also teacher and everyone in the education system needs to have adequate access to the infrastructure. Yeah, and this is where I come to an end, and thank you very much for your attention. I invite you to visit us on bildungsbericht.de and to connect via LinkedIn and all the other connecting services. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elias. Short question from, yes.
Thanks a lot for this really informative talk. You mentioned that there is a lack of data in AI. I wanted to ask you whether there are any significant initiatives or programs or projects underway to change that. I mean, AI has become a reality, you have shown that. What is ongoing in the now and in the near future to have more data about what is happening?
So what I do know is that ISILs, that one of the large-scale assessments that I've also cited over here, they include AI, and I kind of AI literacy in the next survey that is going to be published, I think, in 2029. There has been some inclusion of AI questions in the recent ISIL survey, but the thing with these international large-scale assessments is that every country, they agree on the basics of the digital literacy, that all the countries are kind of comparably can participate. But for example, Germany hasn't participated in the AI framework on that field. So there is quite a lot of development in the field, but it takes a lot of time because these large-scale assessments are quite expensive and quite, yeah, they how do you say that? There's quite a lot of people and quite a lot of money involved in these assessments, and it's quite a long process to include things in these assessments. But especially ISILs in 2029, I think, will have this included. I don't know if Germany will participate in that field or other countries will participate. For example, Switzerland hasn't participated in ISILs, but it's one of the main sources, especially when it comes to educational monitoring on national level, but also on international level. For example, the OECD also highly cited this survey. So there's sometimes also we always ask for a push for more participation in those surveys, but because when it comes, for example, not digitalization or AI or other fields, for example, sustainability, there are or political competencies. We do have large-scale assessments on an international level, but a lot of countries don't participate. So it's also kind of a political decision to give the funding for these participations.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes, I guess one reason that Germany doesn't take part often in such specific large-scale assessments is that the countries in Germany don't want to be compared with each other. So this is really crazy. I know that from currently it's also the financial literacy part of PISA that the Germans don't want to enter. So it's a question of governance again, because you can't govern if you don't have data. Or it's more like rules of thumb governing than if you don't have data. I suppose it's difficult in a federal country to say we need governance, or we need to solve the problem of governance.
Yeah, that's one of the main issues that we have in the federal state to manage that. But what we see in the public debate right now is that it has shifted to be more open when it comes to data and data availability and how to compare countries, or at least having data available. We don't know where this will lead, but for example, our Federal Minister of Education, she pushes us quite a lot right now. We don't know how it is in other countries, but we do see that there's a shift in the debate.